This is our third sermon in the series. And this week we are talking about and listening to having the ears of Jesus. How could Jesus hear the Father over all the noise of life? And how did that connection to the Father empower Jesus for ministry? The sermon series is about ministry. Jesus used his body for ministry. And the church today is the body of Jesus. So our church family is to be used for ministry as well. As part of the church body, we use our physical bodies to make a spiritual difference. Can I have our kids come forward that want to participate? We're going to listen about and think about ears. So I have an example of what is going on. See the image as it starts there? What parts of the body have we talked about so far? Matthew. We talked about a heart, and we talked about our eyes. And today, how many of these do you have? How many of these do you have? How many of these do you have? Does that tell you something? Watch for twice as much, listen twice as much, speak half as much. That's how your ear works. See that picture there? Sound comes in and it vibrates, and then you have these little bones that vibrate, and they touch a very tiny, tiny little spot inside your ear, and that pushes vibrations in there. And that goes down, but this part that looks like a snail, this is all full of liquid. So that sound then travels through, here we go, into here. And how does your brain know what you just heard? It's just taking sound that's vibrating, and right up here, there are little receptors. So when this vibrates, it's going to move, and this is connected to a nerve cell that goes, and that goes all the way to your brain to say, what did I just hear? And it happens so fast, you don't even think about it. It happens constantly, and you have two ears to tell which direction things are coming from. It helps you to be aware. Sound travels in a wave. It is a vibration. Did you know that? Can it travel through a string? Do you think? Let's try it. Can sound travel this far? Not through the air, but through a string. Who wants to take one end? Start walking. Watch me. Don't pull the string out. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, stop. A little more. Now a string's got to be tight. Face Mr. Dick at the back and put that to your ear. What is your name? Hold it there. You tell me what I said. What is your name? What did I say? Try again. What is your name? You can hear it. Here, try it. All right, talk back.
Maya.
Talk back. Tell them something.
Hello?
Could you hear it? You can hear it because sound will travel down the string. Now, if you take a step ahead and it touches the ground, now try it. But that one doesn't work either. Unless it's tight, it won't work. Now try it. It does. It works. Sound can travel down a string. So I made a couple of these. You can take one home if you want. But it's got to be tight to work. You did. Sound travels in a wave, and it can travel down a string. Have you ever gotten dizzy before?
Yes.
Have you ever gotten dizzy because you were spinning? Who would like to get dizzy for me? Hold on. Ready? So what's happening? Now stand up. Do you feel dizzy at all? You know why? Because you're small. If we keep going, what's happening is, what did I say was inside your ear? What's inside your ear? Liquid. What happens when liquid spins in a circle? Does it stop? So it's like this. Your ear is spinning in a circle, in a circle, in a circle, in a circle, and then you stop. But the water keeps going, and your brain says, I'm standing still, but your ear says, no, you're not. We're still spinning. So how do you get undizzy? Exactly. You spin the fluid back the other direction, which is risky because you can just get sick twice. What are things that you like to listen to? Music. Good music or bad music? Weird music. Oh, good music. What are things you do not like to hear? Bad things? Yeah. And bad words.
Things when people grab their finger and scratch it on the
Okay, that's a sound you don't necessarily want to hear. Are you?
Yeah, high-pitched sound.
A high-pitched.
Kind of wrecks your nerves and kind of makes you...
Right. You know what our brain is wired to hear? A crying baby. That sound, no matter where it is, you will pay attention to it. So in movies, that pitch range is used in movies to create anxiety. It's the same sound frequency as a crying baby. How important is your hearing? Like pretty important? Extremely important. Arya, what do you think? Have you had a cold where you're hearing and you're kind of stuffed up and you don't hear very well? How important is choosing to listen? Do you hear that enough, Austin? It's not that you can't hear. Are you choosing to listen? It's important to choose to listen. One of the ways you can... Do you want a bigger ear? I just happen to have ear extenders. That goes on your ear like this. And you have to point it to the sound source. Point it at me. Can you hear me better? Isn't that pretty cool? It's taking the sound and it's funneling it down into your head. Go to each end of the auditorium and talk to each other. Stand up here. Now point it at him. Speak.
Hello? How can I hear him?
Can you hear him?
Uh-huh.
Isn't that amazing? So if you had bigger ears, you could listen better. Is that the way it's supposed to be? Our ears are the shape that they are because they funnel sound down into where you can hear. It also works for a bigger voice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I thought so. Maybe I'll hold my ear extenders over here. Arya, what are you thinking? Ears help you balance. When your middle ear has damage, that's part of our proprioceptors, our part of our brain that tells us where we are in regards to other things, in space and momentum. So if you have inner ear damage, it can be hard to balance. So do you think having bigger ears is a good way to listen better? Have you ever had your parents stretch your ears for you? Just to help you listen? What do we know about the ear? Well, there isn't a whole lot. I mean, it's a pretty complex item, and Arya has a whole card on it. She has some facts. What facts do you want to share with us?
Don't astronauts suffer the sickness while being in space?
So why would astronauts suffer a sickness while they're in space? Uh-huh. It is called space sickness. When your brain doesn't have gravity and that fluid in your ear doesn't work right, it'll disorient you and you'll end up with a condition. How fast is sound?
Super fast.
Super fast. It's actually the speed of sound. It's that fast. 756, 770 miles an hour. But it changes depending on temperature. The warmer the air, the less air molecules in the way, the faster that sound can travel. That, if you're flying in a plane, is called Mach. Mach is the sound, and it took a long time to figure out how to travel past the speed of sound, 770 miles an hour. The smallest bone in the body is in your ear. One of those 3 little bones called the stapes. It is 0.25 to 0.33 centimeters and 0.10 to 0.13 inches, weighs only 1.9 or 4.3 milligrams. What's the hard part behind your ear? Your skull. That's part of your bone. But this is all cartilage. That's why it moves. It also grows. But it's always the same shape. And then you have earlobes that attach and earlobes that don't attach. It's a genetics. If you're dizzy from spinning, what do? You can spin backwards. It can help reset it. Listening is a behavior that can be improved upon. True or false? I hope so. Why is it important that we choose what we listen to? You could miss things that are important if you do not choose to listen.
But you can hear something that person is concerned about.
Okay, you can listen to not only the words, but the motivation. What is somebody concerned about? When you choose to listen, and there are some things that are good to listen to and some things that are not helpful to listen to. And so we choose to listen to things that are going to benefit us. You're just stretching. It's important that we choose what we listen to because it literally goes into our brain. Have you had a song that gets stuck in your head? How did it get there? It's a small world after all. You're still hearing that from Disneyland 10 years ago? Because it went into your ear, into your brain, and it's stuck there. What helps you focus when you're listening? That's a good point. If you maintain eye contact, if you watch your teacher when they're speaking, if you watch the board when somebody's speaking, then you can listen better, depending on what type of a learner you are.
It can help you listen if you are in a quiet room and only the thing you want to hear is talking.
That's true. Choose your environment without multiple competing other sounds. It's easier to listen if you're focused on one sound or if there's only one sound that's coming out. What helps you focus when you listen? How about choice? If you go in knowing you're going to choose to listen, you'll be able to listen better. Listening takes effort because our brains are focused on whatever is changing. So listening is a good thing to do. How do you think Jesus was able to focus on what his Father wanted? How could Jesus constantly listen to just his Father? Because he made that choice. And he said, I'm not going to listen to those things. I'm going to listen for one voice. One voice is going to guide me. Have you heard a voice of a family member when there's other people in a crowd and you know who it is? Because you know that voice and it connects to you. In our family, we have a family whistle because not a lot of people whistle today. So if you're going to a grocery store and you hear, look for me. Because I'm somewhere there. And if you hear kind of a pitiful one, then it's one of the girls. That's something I picked up in Papua New Guinea. Everybody has a whistle. So you have to know whose whistle is what. And then you whistle back. Thank you for your time and attention. Oh, what else did I bring? I brought this. We're not going to use them. But you can play with them later. How does this work? How does it work? So how does the sound go into here and come out of here? Do you have to have them tight? Do they have to touch? How does it work? Is there cords? Do you see cords? Are you paying attention? Not the power cords out there. This is at a frequency that you can't hear, but it translates it to a frequency that you can hear. It's sending it through radio, which will go right through you and send the sound that way. So no matter where you are, this will go about a kilometer and a half. You can hear each other. So this is what we take when we go camping. But you can play with them after. For 2 minutes before you go home. Thank you. You can head back to your seats. A couple quotes before we move into some of our verses. Do you like this one from the senator, when he was then the senator? Lyndon Johnson said, you ain't learning nothing when you're talking. So it's not my time for learning. Maybe it's one of yours. At a presentation, a guest speaker was in. His name was Adlai Stevenson. And speaking to a college group, he gave this quote. He said, I understand that I'm here to speak and you're here to listen. Let's hope we finish at the same time. That's a worthwhile point, I think. Because choosing to listen is a choice. And good communication is this back and forth that we are listening while somebody is speaking, and we take turns to do that. Is it always easy to listen to what God wants us to listen to? We're talking about ministry. When God is calling us to help others, what gets in the way so that we're not necessarily listening to the opportunities, to God's voice, to the calling, to the prompting that we have in order to help other people? Have you had ministry opportunities just go right past you because you didn't take note of them? Jesus had a way of doing that so that when a ministry opportunity was there, he knew which ones to choose and which ones to either let go or choose differently. It is a sense of who you're tuned into. I was going to set up some CD players and have them playing. Would that be distracting to anybody? You can do it when you tune into that voice, but for some people, that auditory distraction would be too much. So what are the competing voices that are constantly out there that are saying, listen to me rather than listen to the Father? There tends to be 3 of them, and the combination goes back and forth because our self is saying something. We have a voice that's within us that's evaluating life and constantly talking to us. That self can be to the negative about selfishness. But Satan is also trying to get his voice in there and trying to distract us and trying to bring other things and other voices and just to be a nuisance so that we don't listen to what we need to listen to because God is speaking. Remember when it says that God spoke in a still, quiet voice? Wasn't in the earthquake. Wasn't in the big dramatic ways, but God spoke in a still, quiet voice. But it took listening in order to pick that voice out of the crowd. Unlike having 3 sets of radios playing. It's one, but 3 different people adjusting the dial. And God gives us the freedom to choose who we're going to listen to. So we have to keep adjusting the dial back to listening to God. It's not just set it once and forget it. It's tuning back in to say, okay, what does God want? And then we're prompted to live the way that He wants, including ministry. We're going to look at a number of passages about listening. It says, let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. We're going to be reminded of some of the passage about listening. So here's my next line. So practice what I'm preaching. You like that? That's pretty good. Usually don't get to use that one too often. Remember James 1:19? My brothers, my dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Have you noticed that you're an everyone? That's what he says. This is our mindset as followers of Jesus. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. The rest of the passage focuses on the anger, the next part of it anyways. How well does the passage describe you? Are you quick to listen? Well, I too often have it the other way around unless I work at making the adjustments. It takes effort for me to stop and listen. I communicate verbally, I think verbally, I do concept thinking. It's easy for me to talk things out. Abby and I study the same way. We just sit there and talk to each other, and that's how we learn. You do that with Kira, she's going to get frustrated, and she's not going to pick it up. She needs to listen and pay attention in a very different way. But it makes it a little harder for Abby and I to put this passage into practice, to be slow, to be quick to listen and slow to speak. But it is a calling that we are given. Hearing is something that we have to pay attention to. I found this to be an interesting passage in Luke 8:17 and 18. For there's nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought into the open. Because that's true, that eventually you'll be able to understand what's going on. But there's a calling in verse 18 that's easy to overlook. It's the only time that this phrase occurs in the New Testament. It says, therefore, consider carefully how you listen. Isn't that an interesting passage? Because these things will be made known, because God will reveal it, therefore, be careful how you listen. Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what he thinks he has, will be taken from him. Does God just expect us to listen? Or does he have other expectations as well? In Matthew chapter 7, 24 through 27, it's the expectation of, you have 2 people. One built his house and one built his house on the... What's the difference between the two in that passage? Do you realize what it says? It's the end of the Sermon on the Mount. It's the conclusion of that sermon. And what he says in there is this. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine, that's where they're similar. Didn't matter whether they were on the sand or on the rock. Each of them heard the words that were said and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built a house on the sand. They also had this in common. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew against it and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Where the two differ in this is they each heard the words, but one put it into practice and the other one didn't. James says the same thing in James 1, 22 through 25. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. That's a period there. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and he immediately forgets what he looks like. There was an opportunity for change, but No, you look in the mirror and then you just go away and do what you want. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, not forgetting what he has heard, but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does. That reminds me of those two things. Listen and do what it says, and the other part is that he kept doing it. Satan wants us to listen to him. But why is Satan never worth listening to? Is he ever worth listening to? Or never worth listening to? As soon as you know that voice, you know, do not pay attention. Because James 8:42 through 47. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God and now I'm here. I have not come on my own, but he sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? He's a bit frustrated that people aren't paying attention. Why is my language not clear to you? But he also answers the same thing when he says, because you are unable to hear what I say. You're unable to hear it. You belong to the father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire. The part of this passage I had forgot was he was a murderer. I want to do a little background into that. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth. For there is how much truth in him? There's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? I'm telling the truth. Why don't you believe me? He who belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. Satan was a murderer and he is a liar. He is the father of lies. If you're lying, you are speaking the words Satan is giving you. Satan is never worth listening to. So how does Satan get us involved in this so that we lie to ourselves and lie to others? Well, a passage that comes to mind is 1 John 2:15 through 17, because he ties into our natural desires. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, and these are the desires that Satan taps into, the cravings of sinful men, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever. That's how he gets involved. That's how he tells us that just live for yourself, because the cravings of what we have, that means we're not going to be involved in ministry. We're not going to be out there helping other people, because it's about getting more, gathering more. It's about our own pride. Whereas when we listen to the Father, he directs us and says to think spiritually. Ministry is definitely a part of God's will. And we need to have ears like Jesus to listen to the Father and hear what's going on around us. As we hear from people in need, as we listen to their stories, as we listen to God's voice of compassion within us, we move from evaluation to action. Isn't that what we learn in the Good Samaritan? They all passed by and saw somebody in need, but they didn't do anything about it. Being a better listener helps us to use our eyes and our hearts to meet the needs around us. We meet physical needs because we're the body of Jesus at work. Ministry is one of the things that he calls us to do. It takes listening. And God has a different way of looking at the world. God has a way of prompting us to have that desire and that compassion to take care of others. There are two more passages I want to look at. There are two other passages. There's two passages. There's just two passages I want to look at before we conclude. The application is, it's just to tune it out. Don't even listen to the world around you. Make sense? Just stop that noise. Just don't even. How do you do it? You have to tune out the world around you. You have to pay attention to what Jesus is saying. So the passages that remind me of this, John 10, 3 through 5. You like the pretty little lambs on there? Remember this passage? What does he say about his sheep? I know, but they're cute. That's why I put them on there. This week we're going to take our directions for ministry from Jesus. Because we have to tune out the world. We have to tune into his voice. What is his purpose? What's his glory? What's the work of the kingdom that God wants us to do? So I picked these because they remind me of my commitment to follow Jesus. These two passages remind me of my dependence on his guidance, my need to stay tuned into his voice in order to follow him. The first one we look at here is John 10, 3 through 5, and then we're going to conclude with Matthew 17, 5. This is a generalized statement that applies to us today too. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and lead them out. When he has brought them all out, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. God will lead us to ministry as he will lead us in the other aspects that we've talked about, because God, we tune into his voice. We know the voice of Jesus that's calling us to go into the world and to help others. So this is a helpful passage to me about paying attention to who's leading. The last passage I want to look at is Matthew 17, 5. I want to look at this passage as not only a conclusion passage, but as a command. This isn't a suggestion. This is during the transfiguration. In Matthew 17, 5, while he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said. So who was that voice from the cloud? Peter, James, and John, Jesus, standing there at the transfiguration, and a voice from the cloud said, God speaks to them and says, this is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. And what are the last three words? Listen to him. Was that only for Peter, James, and John? Or is that a passage that can remind you through the week, who am I listening to, and how is that helping me be faithful? How is that helping me with ministry? Jesus used his body. Jesus' eyes led him to the lost. It led him to the suffering. His heart led him to the cross, and his ears led him to the Father. So what we can do is pay careful attention to where Jesus is leading us. That only happens if we know his voice and if we choose to listen to him. We have 2 sermons left. Next week we look at our hands, and then we talk about the voice that God has given us as well.